So we are going to also, what this essay does also is similar to last week. It's going to quote a question that was raised by the Rogachover, who was a great sage who passed away in the 1930s. And the Rebbe was very much influenced by him, as the Rebbe himself testified and said. So also, he was a very abstract thinker. But again, all abstract ideas must have a practical application. And we're gonna do that. So before we do it inside, let's introduce the Rogachover's question. So the way marriage works in Judaism, there are three ways that a man could initiate a marriage. And that is number one, which is the common one, which we use today, which is why we'll discuss why that is. I guess if we get that far, we'll discuss why that is. But the common one is that a man gives a woman something of value. So in the language of the Mishnah, it's called kesef, money, or kesef in money, but kesef is also silver. That's relevant for later. So you have the idea of betrothal through money. You have the idea of betrothal through a document, just like the divorce. We derive it from this week's parsha, just like divorce it happens through a document. So the marriage can also happen through a document because in the same verse it says marriage and divorce. So we derive that they're related. And the third one is bia, which is marital relations. Even if there was no money transferred, even if there's no document, if man and woman have marital relations with the intention that this is betrothal, that is a third form. The rabbis outlawed that form, but that's the letter of the law. So let's focus on the one that is most common, which is what we do today, which is man giving woman something of value. It happens to be today we do it with a ring, but in the Mishnah, in the Jewish law, it doesn't have to be a ring. It could be anything of value. Why we do a ring is also Kabbalistic. A ring is round. But that's another story. The bottom line is kesef, you give money, and that money brings about and initiates the marriage. Okay, so what's there to ask? Everything is simple. So here comes the Rogachover, and the Rogachover says, "I want to ask you a question." This is like I said, he was the Rabbi Yosef Rosen. He was a rabbi in a town called Rogachow. I think it's in Poland, border Poland, Ukraine. I don't even know. So he writes like this: that you can ask a question, which the question itself sounds on the surface, it sounds just like splitting hairs. Well, you'll see in a minute, it's not necessarily splitting hairs. There are ramifications, and there are also proofs, so it can be proven one way or the other. What is the big question? So man gives woman money, and when the woman accepts the money with the intention to be betrothed, to get married, she's considered married. Okay. Now the question becomes, what is the cause and what is the effect? Do you say that because she accepts the money, money is the cause. You accept the money, the woman accepts the money. Woman accepts the money, and that brings about the marriage. In Hebrew, kiddushin, which is a very interesting word. It means marriage. It means betrothal is the more technical English term, but it's also interesting because in Hebrew, the word kiddushin, betrothal, also has the word kiddushat, the same word as holiness. So it's just interesting that all these words come together. But the bottom line is, the one way to look at the question is, man gives woman money. When the woman accepts the money itself comes first, and the money affects the betrothal. The money creates the marriage. That's one way to look at it. So the cause is the money, and the result is the marriage. Another way to look at it is the opposite. The woman decides to get married. So this sort of spiritual, mystical idea of marriage, I want to say spiritual, but more abstract idea of marriage takes effect. And because marriage takes effect, that's why she gets the money. So what's the difference? They both come together. No, they don't both come together. There's a question of what's the cause and what's the effect. And there are also, like I said, there will be legal ramifications. And from the Talmud, you would see there are proofs to both of these ways of reading it. And I'll just give you the spoiler alert. The spoiler alert is that maybe spiritually they're both true. Maybe even legally they're both true, but that's another question. Okay, hang on just one second. Apologize. And like I said, that's of the introduction. Like I said, it's got everything here. We can't just put out statements. We have to make sure that everything is testable, and we have to be able to figure out which one is the cause and which one is the effect and what the ramification is, and that's what we're going to do. But before that, I'm just going to share the screen. I'm going to read the essay inside, and we'll see how far we get. Okay, the beginning is a little bit more technical. What's the source of marriage? There's two. There are two sources. Okay, we'll read it inside. From the passage in our parsha, if a man takes a woman and is intimate with her, and she left, i.e., was divorced and married, we learn that a woman is acquired, i.e., becomes betrothed by means of money. Becomes betrothed to a man by means of money, a document, or intimacy. That's what I mentioned before. That there's three ways that a woman could become betrothed. What is the sources? So we learned that a woman can be betrothed by means of money from the phrase, if a man marries a woman. And again, the Talmud says that the idea, yikach, must mean money. Okay, excuse me, just 1 second. Come right in, Amy. Come right in. And then we have that she can be betrothed by means of intimacy from the phrase, and is intimate with her. And that she can be betrothed by means of document from the phrase, and she left and married. The Torah juxtaposes marriage to this new husband with divorce from her previous husband. Just as divorce from that husband is performed by means of a document, so too marriage to this husband, i.e., betrothal, can be performed by means of a document. That's the Mishnah. That's the three sources. Okay, now we'll get to our previous discussion. Thank you for coming. Sorry for the 1 day that I can hear. Okay. Okay, so what do we say? We said that we have a question of marriage, and most marriages today, there's three ways to perform marriage, but most marriages today we do through what they call kesef, money. So we don't have to give, and in Talmudic times, the Mishnah says you can give anything of value. Today we give a ring, but it could be anything of monetary value. The question that the Rogachover asks, the philosophical question, which seems abstract, but we're going to show that there are ramifications, both legal and mystical, is what happens first? Do you say that because the woman accepts the money is the source, and the marriage follows, the marriage is the effect? So in other words, we're starting with something abstract, marriage, I accept that I want to be married, and that's why I keep them, and that's why I get the money. That's why I acquire the money. Or do you say it's the reverse? Because the woman acquires the money, and for the sake of marriage, the money triggers the marriage, or is it the marriage triggers the acquisition of the money? That's the question. I don't think any one of us here ever lost sleep over this question. But if you're the Rogachover, this is very important. And if you come through the Talmud, you see different laws that would support these two views. I personally would never see it, but that's another story. But if you know how to read carefully, you would see it. And what we're going to try to do is try to show both the legal ramifications, and then we want to shift to the spiritual ramifications. So we'll say marriage has both dimensions, has a dimension of money, has a dimension of betrothal, whatever that means. And the question is, what's the cause and what's the effect? And the answer could be, it depends, or both. In some marriages, one is more dominant. So that's the roadmap. So eventually, when we move back to the 75 Mason, we'll have the printers, we'll have handouts, we'll be good to set. But in the meantime, we'll just look at this. Okay. To preface, the Rogachover, we mentioned him last week as well, analyzes the conceptual mechanics of betrothal with money, considering what is the cause and what is the effect. Is the acquisition of the monetary payments what causes the betrothal to take effect, or is it the opposite? In other words, the fact that she decides she wants to accept the money, is that the cause? Or is it no, the fact that she wants to be married, therefore I get the ring? And if the guy says, I will see in a minute. In other words, that's the cause. Because she accepts the money, that's why the marriage takes effect. Or is it because she agrees to be married, that's why the money takes effect? That's why she acquires the money. Is it the betrothal that causes the money to be acquired? So, right? So is the acquisition of the monetary payment what causes the betrothal to take effect? Or is it the opposite? It is the betrothal that causes the money to be acquired. That's the question. Meaning, does the betrothal happen by a woman acquiring the money, or is it the opposite? I.e., by her becoming betrothed, or by her becoming betrothed, the woman acquires the money. The Rogachover brings support for both perspectives. So we're not really going to say what's the ramification because we don't know yet. But from the source, from the proofs, you'll see the ramification. So we'll start with the ramification. We'll start with the easier one. The easier one is easy to pick up. The second one, it's like you have to absolutely be an abstract thinker to figure this out. Even once he says it, it's hard to follow, but to figure this out on your own, I don't know how we think to figure this out. Okay, so we want to support now the notion that what happens is first, the marriage triggers the acquisition of the money. How would we prove that? So the way you would prove that, you have to find a case that in a normal case, the money would not be acquired under these circumstances. In this case, she's married and she keeps the ring. So if you can find a case like that, then you say it's not that acquiring the money triggered the marriage, because under regular circumstances, you cannot acquire money in this circumstance. So it must be that the marriage causes the connection, and the marriage, once the marriage takes effect, then the money follows the marriage. See what I'm saying? We want to find a case where under normal circumstances, the money is not acquired.
Couldn't it also be though, so if I give somebody money, I'm not married, or a man gives a woman money?
Yeah, for sure. We have to preface that we're talking about that both parties agree that this is for that the acquisition of this, that receiving the money is for marriage. And they both agree. If I give you $1 and you think it's a gift, and I say it's marriage, it's not binding. But the point here is, when we both agree that this should be marriage, the question is the marriage make you get the money, or does the money make you get the marriage? So I'm looking for a case. Maybe the case itself, maybe the introduction makes it more complicated. So I'll do another 10 seconds, then we'll take Vicky's question. But we're looking for a case where under normal circumstances, this is not a way to give you money. I cannot give you money. The money is legally not yours in this scenario. But in the case of marriage, it is. That would tell me that marriage takes effect. Marriage is much more abstract. So marriage takes effect, even though in a normal situation, you cannot acquire money in this case. And because the marriage takes effect, then you also get the ring and you get to keep the ring. But it can't be the causes money if I find a scenario like that, because money doesn't work in this case. So the example will be simpler than the introduction. So we'll wait for the example. Go ahead, Vicky.
Thank you, Rabbi. I also couldn't understand the question because for me, it's inseparable. Can it be together? Because it's on a Chachma level. The concept is in woman's mind. I'm thinking like there is a concept where all those aspects of the marriage are inseparable.
That's why we read the Rogatchover, because the Rogatchover is a philosopher. He looks at the law and looks at matters that we would see as inseparable, and he says everything is separable. Let's think abstractly. Now, when you go to the wedding and you get the ring, you're happy that you're married. You're also happy that you got a ring. It's two separate things. And maybe some people don't like the ring, but they're happy to be married. Maybe some people I like the ring, but they're not happy to be married. If you think about it, it's two separate things. Now, they come together. Now, do they come? So Vicky says they come together. The Rogatchover says, I don't know. Maybe they come together. Maybe they don't. Maybe everything has to be cause and effect. So we'll see the proofs and we'll start seeing that it's not so simple. They don't always come together. And what's the first proof? So the first proof, I'll say per heart and read it inside. First proof is easy to understand, relatively. Second one is hard, but it's only hard because you have to follow it. But the first thing is very simple. Okay, let's start very simple. Let's say I want to give you money and I want you to acquire it. And I want you to acquire it to the point where I can't retract. Right? So it's legally yours. So I take $5 and I say, here, Amy, this is for you. Not marriage. You're married. I'm married, thank God. This is for you. I want you to keep the money. And I want to get to the point that I can't acquire it. So how do I what's the act of acquisition that Amy can get the money? So there's all kinds of forms of acquisition. If she picks it up, it's hers. If it's in her possession, it's hers. Okay, there is an acquisition that says if it comes into her 4 cubits, it's hers. It wouldn't work here because it's in my house. If it's outside on the street, I throw $5 within 4 cubits. Cubit is 1.5 feet. There's different opinions, 1 foot, 2 feet. Average at 1.5 feet. If I throw $5 and it comes within Vicky or Amy's 4 cubits, it's hers. She cannot retract it. I cannot retract it. You didn't pick it up. Doesn't matter. It's in your daled amot, your 4 amot, your 4 cubits. It's yours. The halachic principle is that you have sort of a space around you. That's considered your I guess they would say in psychology, your personal space, right? Don't get too close to someone's personal space. If you put $5 and I throw $5 into my personal space, it's mine. It's hers. I can't retract it. What happens if I'm 50 feet away from Amy? I throw $5, I have very good aim, but it goes 10 feet out of her person, away from her. So it's far away from me, but it's close to her, but it's outside her 4 cubits. The law is she did not acquire it. Unless you pick it up, assuming you didn't pick it up, I can come and take the money back. Or someone else, or I don't know if someone else can come. Good question. But the bottom line is it's not Amy's. Why? Because to acquire, you have to use one of the conventional forms of acquisition, and one of those conventional forms of acquisition is 4 cubits. But if it's outside of 4 cubits, she doesn't acquire it. That's the law. Fine, that's with money. Says the Ragat Shavar, when it comes to marriage, you find a fascinating law. If man throws the ring to the woman, I guess she's very anxious to marry her. 2 people are chasing her. Each one has to throw the, he doesn't have time to come and give her the ring. So he runs up to her. So he throws the ring to her. Remember, there's 2 witnesses. Last week we discussed the 2 witnesses. So the 2 witnesses are here. We have that in place. You don't need a rabbi. You don't need a hall. You don't need a photographer. You don't need a caterer. You just need 2 witnesses and a man and a woman. So you got the 2 witnesses. You have the man and the woman. He throws the ring to her, and it goes, he's 50 feet away from her. It goes 10 feet away from her. So it's far away from her, close to her. Says the Talmud, the law is mikudeshes, he's betrothed. Why? Because it's closer to her than to him. If it's closer to him, she's not betrothed. If it's closer to her, she's betrothed. That's the law. Now, I read the law, I wouldn't make anything of it. Says the Ragat Shavar, 1 second, stop 1 second. Well, if you say she's betrothed, you're also saying, I can't get my ring back. Now, what happens to say, you know what? I love you, but give me the ring back. I'll give you a cheaper ring. No. If she's betrothed, part of that is the ring is hers. 1 second. How does she get the ring? It's monetary. It's a monetary acquisition. Monetary acquisitions, it must be within her 4 cubits. There is no way to get somebody to acquire money, and that acquisition should be final if it's outside of her 4 cubits, and it's a legal impossibility. Says the Ragat Shavar, maybe what's happening here is like this. The cause is betrothal. Betrothal is an abstract concept. It has different rules. So because the betrothal takes effect, now the money follows. And therefore, not only I can't retract the marriage, I also cannot retract the ring because it's hers. But why is it hers? She didn't get it. It's outside of 4 cubits, doesn't matter. Under the laws of acquiring money, she can't get it. But because the marriage worked, and the money, the acquisition of the ring, the money follows marriage. Here is a proof that they don't happen together, because there's no way money would be able to be acquired. The only reason why the acquisition of money works is because the betrothal worked. So in other words, this is proof that that money follows betrothal. I wouldn't think of this, but that's why I'm not the Ragat Shavar. That's why he gets paid the big bucks. And like I said, the other side is even going to be more abstract. It's going to be even more abstract. But this one I think is relatively easy to understand, right? We found the case that the acquisition of money would not work in this case, because to acquire money, it has to go within the 4 cubits of the woman. In this case, the ring is outside the 4 cubits, and yet the man cannot retract the marriage and cannot retract the money. So what happened here? The money, the acquisition of the money took effect. By itself, it cannot. It followed something else. So the marriage, how marriage works, we don't know. Money was very clear. We know how money works. We know how acquisition of money works. So we know it wasn't the money that triggered this. So it's the marriage. Once the marriage took effect, the money took effect too. So that's sort of a proof that the money goes, that the marriage happens first and the money follows the marriage. And like I said, this is the legal side. We want to just show the other legal side, and then we get to the mystical. Once we get to the mystical, it becomes fun. I mean, it's fun. This is fun too. Yeah, Vicky, you agree that in this case, you have to ask, what could you say, how does the money take effect? You have to ask the question, do they happen simultaneously, or is there again, we don't say simultaneously, we don't just mean the second. We're not talking about the clock. We mean cause and effect. Even I would agree that it could happen on the same nanosecond. That doesn't matter. In the language of the Ragat Shavar, I said what happens first. What I really mean is what's the cause. He says Ila. There's Ila, and Ila is the cause. There's cause and effect. What's the cause? What's the effect? The money here cannot be the cause, because money doesn't work. Acquisition of money, you say she's married because she acquired money. She didn't acquire money in this case. There's no way she can acquire money by the laws of acquisition of money. So the cause is not the money. So the cause is the betrothal. Because she was betrothed, the money follows the betrothal. So I'm agreeing with your question. In other words, your previous question. I'm not sure where you stand on this question, but I'm agreeing with your question, and I'm being more accurate. The question is not what's first and what's second, because it could be that you're right. Your intuition was right that they happen simultaneously. That's fine. On the clock, they happen simultaneously. It's not so much a question of what time it happens. It's a question of what's the cause and what's the effect. And like I said, so is it that the cause is the betrothal and the acquisition of the money follows, or is it the cause is the money and the betrothal follows? And we first showed an example for the betrothal is the cause and the money followed. And the way we proved that is we found a case where betrothal works, acquisition of money would not work. But now, once the betrothal works, the man cannot retract not only from the betrothal, but he can't get the money back because she already acquired it, because even though under the laws of acquisition of cash, it doesn't work, but betrothal works. And once betrothal happens, the money follows the betrothal. I think is relatively understandable. The second one is going to be a little harder. So maybe we'll read it inside, not the whole thing. We'll read a paragraph or two inside just to get the flavor, preserve the flavor, and then we'll go to the next side. Okay, the Ragachava brings support for both perspectives. So we'll start with the simple one. The law is that if a woman is standing in the public domain and her husband threw a get close to her, she is divorced. You have to give her the bill of divorce. Remember, we said in the beginning that the laws of divorce and the laws of marriage are similar. They derive from the same verse. So let's say, case of divorce, you have to give her a document. Again, what does it mean, give her a document? So the law is, if she doesn't have to be in her 4 cubits, if it's closer to her than to him, it's a divorce. Okay, what do we see here? That in marriage and divorce work different than acquisition of money. It doesn't have to be in your 4 cubits. It just has to be closer to her. And the Mishnah says, is it a Mishnah? The law is that a woman standing in the public domain and her husband who goes to her, she is divorced, betrothal. What's the source? Mishnah. Yeah, it's a Mishnah. Beautiful. It's a Mishnah. And the same applies to betrothal. In other words, marriage and divorce, the law is that it does not have to, it doesn't have to be within her 4 cubits. By divorce, outside the 4 cubits, if it's closer to her, she's divorced. If he throws the ring and it's closer to her, she's betrothed. Fine. The Ragachava says further that according to the Rishonim, the early commentaries, the same would apply in the case of betrothal by means of money. In other words, we don't only mean if I give through a document for marriage, even if I throw her a ring for marriage, because we said there's 3 ways to perform the marriage, ring, document, or marital relations. I throw the ring to her, it's closer to her, she's betrothed, she's married, although it's not in her 4 cubits. Seemingly, since she hadn't yet acquired the money, because we are not only referring to a case when the money landed within her 4 cubits of her. So in other words, it's not in her 4 cubits. How could she be considered betrothed? This is proof that it is the betrothal that causes the money to be acquired. She acquires the money because she is betrothed. So that's proof for one side. Now we're left with a much harder job, which is to offer proof for the other side. That is that it's the money that causes the betrothal. So for that, it's going to be a little bit more complex, but I'm sure we can handle this. Yeah, Vicky, are we on the same page? Are we in agreement? Are we in disagreement?
Well, so far you're describing the scenario that was my question was related to, because for me, that's the intent that counts.
What do you mean?
I mean that the idea that he conceived to marry her, that's what counts.
Yeah. He agreed to marry.
How it manifests itself, whether he throws, whether he gives, whether he mails, whatever.
Yeah, so they both agree.
On that end, I'm waiting to see how it works on the other side.
Oh, so we both agree. We both agree that they both agree. On this side, we have one scenario where the cause is the betrothal. I mean, money follows betrothal. The money follows betrothal. That's what we proved. We're going to try to prove the other as well, and then we're going to have a few minutes. We'll go to the spiritual side, and we'll say there's 2 forms of marriage. But marriage has 2 components. One is alluded to with money. One is alluded to with betrothal. There is a question. Hopefully, you have both. They happen simultaneously, just like they have to happen simultaneously. The question is, what's the cause? What's the foundation? What's first? The answer may be, it depends what kind of marriage you have. The answer may be they both work as a cause, possibly. No, not possibly. Yes, that's the answer. But again, we only get to the mystical has to be grounded in the legal, because we don't know much about the mystical. We have to extrapolate. The legal we know, but again, we're looking at a simple thing as marriage. It's not simple. Marriage is not simple, but the point is, it looks like a simple transaction. You give the woman a ring and she's married. The Rogachover says, let's look philosophically. Let's take this apart. They may be happening together, maybe not, maybe a nanosecond. But the question, his question is not so much time, but the question is cause and effect. What's the cause? What's the effect? Okay, let's get to the next case. The next case is it's just a few steps. That's why I say it's not complicated, it's not rocket science, but it's just a few steps. So let's do the steps carefully, assuming I can remember them. We had this last week also. We said last week, when it comes to the laws of the Torah, I can retract. If I make a statement, I could retract it if the retraction happens immediately. The language of Talmud, while I'm speaking, I could retract. Right? If I say, I want to marry you, you may be married, but you're hereby married with this ring, forget it. I was joking. Oh, that's a bad example. I want to say, I'm going to give you $10. You know what? I'm not going to give you $10. That's okay. I don't have to give you $10. Because in all matters of the law, once you say something, you could, while you're still saying it, you could still amend if the time didn't lapse. There's less than 3 seconds. We mentioned last week, and we're going to use that same logic. Last week we also discussed the Rogachover, so the Rogachover loves this law because it's something. So it's different. If it's an exception, that means there's something here. So it draws his attention. Marriage, it doesn't work that way. If you tell a woman, here's the ring, you're going to be married. Oh, you know what? You're not going to be married. She's married. You cannot retract. You cannot change it even while you're speaking. That is the law. That is the law. Now, you're not going to be able to do anything with this law yet. But there's a commentary, Rashbam. Rashbam is the grandson of Rashi. And there are certain tractates of the Talmud. Rashi gives a commentary in all the tractates. But certain commentators, certain tractates of the Talmud, there is no Rashi, either because he didn't write it or more likely it was lost. So that they print the Talmud with the commentary of the Rashbam, his grandson. And Baba Basra, you have different tractates that are like that. So the Rashbam, Shmuel bar Meir was his name, Shmuel the son of Meir, who was Rashi's son-in-law, so he was Rashi's grandson. The Rashbam says like this. The Talmud says that if I want to betroth a woman, regarding betrothal, you cannot retract immediately. But the Rashbam paints the scenario and says what happens. I would think what that means, I say, hey, woman, here is the ring. You're married to me. You know what? You're not married to me. Give me the ring back and you're not married. I can't do that. That's what I would think. That's not what the Rashbam says. Rashbam says the scenario is as follows. And why he says this is strange, but the Rogachover pounces. Why he says it, so what Rashbam says like this. The scenario is like this. I go to a woman and I say, here is money, ring, $50, doesn't matter. Here's the ring. I want you to be married to me with this ring, according to the laws of Moses and Israel. You know what? I don't want to be married, but I do want you to keep the ring. That's the scenario that the Rashbam paints. That when the Talmud says you cannot retract marriage, it's talking about when I want the woman to keep the ring. What the Rashbam is saying, if I want to take back the ring, I could. If I want to say, here is a ring and I want you to be married, you know what, give me back the ring, forget it, you could retract. That's the way that Rashbam learns this piece of Talmud. Says the Rogachover, why is the Rashbam learning the Talmud this way? So here's the Lipi mix, which is fascinating, which is amazing, brilliant. He says like this. This proves that the cause is the money. How does this prove that the cause is the money? That the cause is the money and the marriage file. How's that prove? What are we saying? We're saying that you cannot retract marriage. Why not? Because, and we're saying the scenario is you want her to keep the money. So if you want her to keep the ring, you cannot retract marriage. But if you want to take back the money, you could retract. You could retract. 1 second. Didn't you just tell me that you cannot retract marriage? How come in this case, the Rashbam says that I could retract the marriage if I retract the money? So obviously, the Rashbam believes, it's not obvious, it's only obvious once you think about it, obviously the Rashbam believes that the cause is the money. And they say, you cannot retract money, you cannot retract marriage. But if you want to retract the money, you could retract money, and the marriage follows the money. So if there's no money, there's no marriage. You see? So you see what's happening here? In other words, we have a case, the Talmud says you cannot retract marriage. But according to the Rashbam, you can. In other words, if I say, give me the ring back, I could retract the marriage. And therefore, the Rashbam says that when the Talmud says you cannot retract marriage, it's because I want the woman to keep the ring. I say, you know what, here is the ring for marriage. And I say, no, keep the ring, but I don't want to be married. That I can't do. Because marriage you cannot retract. So how come if I say I want the ring back, I could retract the marriage? Didn't you finish telling me you cannot retract marriage? Yeah, you can retract marriage, but you could retract money. And because the cause is the money and the marriage follows, if you retract the money, there's no marriage. Now, I would never in a trillion years see this as a proof. But once the Rashbam says it, it's very logical. Once the Rogatchover says it's very logical, there is no other way that Rashbam could make sense. The Rashbam obviously holds and believes that the cause is the money, and therefore you could retract the money, and therefore you could retract the marriage if you want to retract the money, even though if you don't want to retract the money, you can retract marriage, because marriage alone can't be retracted, but money could. So if you tell me marriage cannot be retracted, but money could, and then I could tell the woman, give me back the ring and give me back the marriage, and we don't want to be married, and that would work if I do it immediately. It's because, yes, marriage cannot be retracted, but because marriage is contingent on the money, because the cause is the money, that means that the marriage follows the money, the cause is the money. So we brought two proofs. We had a proof that the cause is the marriage, and that's because in this scenario where money does not work, because I threw the ring and it was outside of the woman's 4 cubits, so money doesn't work. But in that case, she gets the money. Why? Because the marriage takes effect. Because we know for the laws of marriage and divorce, it does not have to be in a 4 cubits, it just has to be closer to her. So that was proof. That was proof that the cause is that was proof that the cause was the marriage and the money follows. And here we have proof from the Rashbam that no, that the cause is the money. And therefore, even though the Talmud says you cannot retract marriage, if you retract the money, you could retract the marriage. Because you can't retract marriage, but you could retract the money, and the marriage is dependent on the money. And therefore, Rashbam has to say that when the Talmud says you cannot retract marriage, it's talking about a case when I want the woman to keep the money. Because if I want to retract the money, I absolutely can retract the marriage, even though I can't retract marriage. But I'm not retracting the marriage, I'm retracting the money, and the marriage is dependent on the money, and therefore they both retracted. A little hard to follow, but here it is. That's our two sides. Now, would I pick this up? No, but that's why I'm not the Rogatchover.
Why is Rashbam allowed to, why is that?
Why is that legitimate?
Yeah.
Okay, so some people maybe disagree, and some people would not interpret the Talmud that way. But the Rashbam believes, for him, it's a premise. To him, it's obvious. He says this is what the Talmud must mean. That's the way he says the Talmud. That's why he understands the Talmud. Why, you say, why is he allowed? Forget.
Well, why is halacha follow?
Well, I'm not sure what the halacha follows.
Okay.
That's just his interpretation. So we're just going to say, according to the Rashbam makes no sense unless you understand. If you're the Rashbam and your perspective is that marriage is dependent on money, that's why you would say what he said. If you believe that marriage follows the money, what he says makes no sense whatsoever. So he's allowed to interpret. That's his job. The Talmud says something. We have to interpret. What does the Talmud mean? But the question is, what causes the Rashbam to say what he says? That we're talking about a scenario where the man wants the woman to keep the cash. Implied is that if he wants to take the money back, he could take the money back, and the money and the marriage he could retract, even though the Talmud says you can't retract marriage. So how could the Rashbam say this? You're saying, why does he say this? Well, you're saying how? I'm saying why. He could say it. He has the right to say this is what the Talmud means. But why is he saying this? He's saying this because because from his perspective, money is the cause. So even if you believe, even if the Talmud is 100% right, you want to take Talmud's face value, marriage cannot be retracted. Says the Rashbam, of course marriage cannot be retracted, but the money could. And the marriage is contingent on the money. So if you destroy the source, you destroy the effect. So he's not disagreeing with the Talmud. He says, I agree, marriage cannot be retracted, but the money could. And I believe, says the Rashbam, that money is the cause and marriage is the effect. And therefore, if I want to say what's the case where marriage cannot be retracted, if the money is not being retracted. But if the money is being retracted, the marriage can be retracted. Basically, what he's saying, in other words, is in the language of the Rogatchover, the cause is the betrothal, the marriage, the cause is the money, marriage follows. Okay, it's a little hard to wrap our heads around it, but this is abstract. But this is the legal side.
Well, I'm okay with both of those, logically, legally, and it only proves that the two ideas, because you can understand it both ways.
Yeah.
The two ideas are one and the same, because marriage has both business transaction aspect and the spiritual aspect.
But of the two, what's the cause? What's the effect?
What's the cause, the effect? You cannot separate, I guess, because in that case, if you follow his logic, he is doing it both ways. It means you cannot separate. If he says that the first example is like from my perspective, the first example makes more sense, is the cause, then it's the intent that counts. But because he considers both ways, it means you cannot separate.
You cannot separate. I agree that you cannot separate. I still want to know what's the cause. Even if you say they have to have both, there's still a question of what's the cause and what's the effect. Let's say there's a cause and effect that cannot be separated. But there's still a question of what's the cause, what's the effect. So I agree they cannot be separated.
And that's from the common sense perspective, the intent to marry is the cause.
Okay, I hear. Okay, so let's do a few more minutes. We'll look at the spiritual side, and then we'll tie it all together. Meantime, give me just 1 second. I'll remove some of the noise in the background. 1 second.
You want to get loud enough to go beyond the monitor.
Right. Okay, we're going to do a few minutes because we're under a little bit of pressure here, but let's go. I'm going to go straight to the 4. Should I say it by heart first? Okay, the Rebbe is going to say like this, that when it comes to marriage, there's 2 components, is the money and there's betrothal. But you have to look at the etymology of the words to see the deeper meaning. So what is money? Money is silver. Kesef is silver. In biblical Hebrew, the word for silver is the word for yearning. Nichsof nichsafti, my heart longs, my heart pines, very intense yearning. That's what kesef is, that's what silver, that's the etymology of the word. Then you have kiddushin. What does the word kiddushin mean? Betrothal. What does betrothal mean? Betrothal means holy. And the Talmud itself, you don't need the Kabbalah for this. The Talmud says, why do we call the betrothal of a woman? Why do you call it kiddushin? Says the Talmud, because when you betroth a woman, she is prohibited for the rest of the world, like hekdesh, like holy material. If there's something that belongs to God, we can't touch it. Like an animal sacrifice, like a sacrifice is something you donate to the temple. It's considered hekdesh. Nobody's allowed to use it. So the word hekdesh means exclusive to God. So in this case, in marriage, it means represent the etymology of the word kiddushin means represents the exclusivity of this marriage. Right? I could love you, but many other people could love you too. Marriage means we understand that it's an exclusive relationship. That's what betrothal means, kiddushin. So it's almost like saying no to everybody else. To say yes to one person is saying no to everybody else. Marriage has both those components. I love you, but I'm not going to relate to anybody else in the same way, in the same intimate way. So you have both. In another way to put it, the Rebbe doesn't use these words, but I like to use the words love and commitments, because love means I love you, I want to connect to you. What does commitment mean? Commitment means even if I don't sense the love right now, I'm exclusive to you, not to anybody else. And therefore, if there's another distraction, I'm going to say, no, that's off limits. It's a different emotion. It's a different emotion. And Vicky is right, because she's been insisting since 10:05 this morning that they're both the same. Because a marriage has to have love and commitment. A marriage has to have the idea that there's a positive feeling between the two of us, and also that it's exclusive. The question is, what's the cause and what's the effect? And again, this is a philosophical question, because maybe on the clock, it happens the same second. If you stand at a wedding canopy with your stopwatch, you're not going to be able to identify a nanosecond where there's one, not the other. But I don't want to say what's the word. Theoretically, not theoretically, conceptually, there's a cause and effect. And in the legal sense, it could be that one or the other can be a cause. In other words, what I like to think about, because the Rogatchover doesn't conclude, and he has proofs for both ways, so I'm very comfortable saying it could be both. Either one could be a trigger, maybe, right? If it's a case where the money can't work, only the betrothal works, the betrothal follow the money will follow the betrothal. If it's a case where betrothal doesn't work because the betrothal can be retracted and the money does work, so the betrothal follows the money, they both could happen. Spiritually, it's the same point. You can have a relationship that's predicated on commitments, and then the love follows, or vice versa. And of course, what the Rebbe is going to do is going to say this is the relationship between God and the Jewish people. If God and the Jewish people is groom and bride, we have two ways of relating to God. One is a positive relationship. That's love to God, or the positive commandments. And then that's sort of, I love God, I'm expressing my love to him. But part of the relationship is saying, I am exclusive to God. I am hektish. I'm exclusive to God. I have to say no to the negativity. I have to say no to the distractions. Just like if I'm in a marital relationship, I have to say no to other people. So when I say yes to God, I'm also saying no to other people, which is saying no to negativity. And that's the 365 negative commandments. So the 248 positive commandments is an expression of the love, of the kesef, of the longing to God. But then you can't just have a relationship of saying, I love you. That's not enough. I love you is not marriage. I love you is wonderful, but it's not marriage. Marriage also has to have the component, I love you and I love nobody else as much as I love you. So in other words, I'm saying no to the distraction. And the question is, you have to have both. You have to have both positive commandments and negative commandments. But then the question is, what's the cause? What's the effect? What's the beginning of the relationship? Do you start by separating yourself from negativity and then moving yourself close to God? First rid yourself of negativity, first rid yourself of distraction, and then try to increase a love to God? Or do you say, I'm not there yet. I'm weak spiritually. I can't make boundaries. I don't yet have the power to say no to negativity, but I'll start with a love to God. I'll start with a positive mitzvah. I'll start with the money, and hopefully the exclusivity will follow. And if we had time, we would show that both would work in the spiritual relationship with God. There's the normal way, in other words, the logical way, and there's the I would say illogical, but not the norm, but still works. And why one is the norm, we don't have time to get into it, but there's two verses where you learn that money works. One verse is regarding marriage, and one verse is really about a different subject, which it's just there as a parenthetically. So the law that money is the law that money works in regarding marriage, which is the normal way. In other words, this is the normal place. There's implication there that the cause is the betrothal and the money follows. In other words, logically, what you should start from is, especially spiritually, before you want to have a connection to God and you want to awaken a love to God, you have to start logically by saying, get rid of the distraction first. That's the logical way. But there's also ways to get married that are not the logical. You fall in love, it's not expected, which means you could start with love. And then the kiddushin, the exclusivity, the idea that I say no to the distraction, the idea that I say I'm exclusive to God, that hopefully will follow. So that is that's the picture. That's the big picture. The picture is that marriage is not just about love. It's not just about commitment. They both have to happen together. Therefore, there's money, and there is money, and there's money, and there's the kiddushin, which is the exclusivity. The Rebbe says at the end, that's why even though there are three forms of marriage could be by document, but it becomes for a very long time now, probably almost 2,000 years, it becomes virtually the norm that everybody betroths only with kesef, only with money. Why not a document? What's wrong with a document? Well, the woman likes a ring, but not everybody can afford a ring. No, we don't do documents. We just do money. Why? Because we want to highlight the component of love in the marriage. And kesef is the love. But the bottom line is that even when you have the love is not alone. Love doesn't do it by itself. The love also comes along with kiddushin. Kiddushin means holiness, but holiness means I'm exclusive to this marriage, which basically means I'm committed to you even when I don't want to be, even if there's temptation. I would rather be somewhere else. I say no to the temptation, and I say I'm here for you. And not because I love you at this moment, because at this moment I love the temptation. Okay, so that's the commitment aspect, and that's the exclusivity aspect. And that is something that is integral to the marriage. Again, both legally in the philosophy of the law. You could say, what's the cause and what's the effect? Now, you have to have both. You have to have respect and love. There's no love without respect. There's no love without respect. So you have to have both. But the question is, conceptually, what is the cause? What's the effect? Meaning spiritually, where do I start from? If I want to create a relationship with another person, especially with another person, probably love is the easier way. But especially if I want to create a relationship with God, where do I start from? Do I start from a positive step, which expresses my love to God? Or do I say, you know what, if I want to have a relationship with God, I better stay away from the distraction? And the answer is, you could do both. In normal terms, you would first want to get rid of temptation before you bring God into your life. The metaphor is, if I'm bringing a guest, I first want to remove the mud from my house before I bring in the nice furniture. But sometimes we don't have time to remove the mud. Bring in the nice furniture, and bringing in the nice furniture will motivate me to remove to move the love, to create the love, to remove the mud, to remove the distraction. And that's not the logical thing. It's not what the interior designer will tell you to do. Say, first get rid of the negative, then bring in the positive, right? I use the metaphor. I say, I want to start eating healthy. So you can tell me, eat spinach. Or you could say, I'm not going to talk to you about eating spinach until you stop drinking Coca-Cola. So what's the right way to do? So one way to do is, logically, you would say, what's the point of eating something healthy if you're still putting the poison in your body? Stop putting in the poison, then come back to the nutritionist, then we'll talk. And logically, that may be the logical thing to do. But in reality, sometimes it's very difficult to say no to the temptation before I have positive habits. And therefore, eat the broccoli, do the love. And then we'll work on doing exclusively positivity. And that's the two ways of looking at it. And that's the story in short. A lot more to say. But to me, this is fascinating on many, many levels. But the beauty that the more you get into the technicalities of the law, which seem to be totally abstract and just philosophical and not relevant. First of all, we find a legal relevance because we have ramifications. We have proofs of both sides. So we see that there's some way of testing this theory. And you could test it both ways. So it's much more practical than we thought when we started out with. We started out with just a totally conceptual question. Two things are happening at the same moment. What's the cause? What's the effect? What's the difference? Oh, we would have a difference. Because if whatever you say, that would affect those laws that we mentioned. So there's a legal ramification, but there's also a mystical, spiritual ramification. First of all, between people. In my relationship, in a human marriage, I have to understand that there's two components. It's not just about love, it's just about commitment. And the other hand, it's not just about commitment, it's also about love. You say, what's the problem? I'm doing everything I need to do. I'm paying the bills, I'm paying the mortgage, I'm here for you, I'm not being distracted by other people. Yes, but are you expressing love? Right? They both are important. You can't have one without the other. Question is, in the spiritual relationship with God, you also need both. And the question is, but what's the cause? What do you start from? The answer is, it depends. In perfect times, in a perfect scenario, you would start with one, but we're not always in perfect scenarios. Start with the other. So that's the story in short. Like I said, this is very, very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you for coming on Zoom. Thank you for coming in person, despite all the challenges, to come in and find us. We're hiding. We're in a little bit of an exile for the next couple of days, and then hopefully hopefully from here it's only going to be increased. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. So the conclusion is that the love is like a primary emotion, and that's the cause.
No, the conclusion, legally or spiritually?
Spiritual.
The law, let's stop. I think that Rebbe doesn't really fully explain it because the Rogatchover Rebbe doesn't fully articulate it. I think that we have two components that you're right that in many cases they happen simultaneously, but they each could be a cause. In other words, if you find a scenario, imagine you have two chemicals that for some reason, in certain scenarios, one chemical is deactivated, right? So then the other chemical would grab on, right? So both the marriage and the money, both of them could be as a cause. They both could work as a cause. So if you're in a scenario where one of them is deactivated, for example, I threw the money and it's outside the woman's 4 cubits. So in that case, the money cannot be activated, but then the betrothal could be activated as a cause and the other one can follow. And the reverse is true. If you're in a case where the money cannot be the cause because I want to retract the money, then the betrothal would be the cause, and the betrothal would initiate it, and the money would follow, and I would not be able to retract the money. So in other words, we have two components, each could serve as a cause, and whatever is allowed to be activated is activated. Now you ask me, in a regular situation where both can work, which one is the cause? That I don't know. That's why the Rogatchover doesn't say, I don't know, I have two causes. But I know that if I isolate the scenarios, each one of these two components could be a cause. When I have both, which one happened? I don't know. So I can't test that. I can't test that. In the case where both work, I can't test it. So the Rogatchover doesn't test it. He said there's no way to test it, so I don't know. But I could isolate a scenario where money is not the cause, their betrothal will be the cause. I can isolate a scenario where betrothal is not the cause and money will be the cause, which means both could be a cause. What does that mean for us in our relationship with God or with other people? Is you start with commitment, you start with love. Both could be a legitimate way to create a relationship. Which one is? If I'm challenged with one, do the other. Do what you're good at and build off that. That's the story.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.